Somehow, the last week of February has already arrived, and as we turn the corner towards March and the return of spring football, we turn our attention to the corners on the podcast daily. This is a Monday. That's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward, and there's a lot to discuss about what happened at that position for Ohio State. I think that they've reclaimed the BIA moniker safely. Bill, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. It makes it feels like it's back home again. Yeah, I think that's right.
And with that being said, they also last season, midway through the season, or I guess when you play 16 games, game 6, I don't know, that's slightly before the midway point. We're under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of fire, and we continue to talk about them even all the way up through the end of the regular season, even as they started playing better. It's like, well, were they tested by good enough quarterbacks? Were there good enough receivers? Do we know if they have fixed this issue? So they didn't spend all of last year basking in the glow of greatness the way we thought they might, although they were certainly at that level throughout the playoff run and on the way to a national championship.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't I guess if you wanted to be somewhat realistic about it, like really the only team, I guess in hindsight, that was going to like really pressure them would have been Oregon the second time, right? And they more than answered that bell. And then like even to get like Texas probably worried you a little bit. Like I don't know so much that Tennessee and Notre Dame do, but Oregon and Texas presented serious passing attacks, and we all know what happened the first time that Ohio State played Oregon. And I thought the corners were fine in that game. They were good in that game. So it wasn't a year, and I guess it's typically the case playing in the Big Ten, where like you're not going to see just sort of like a murderer's row of receivers week after week after week after week. But those handful of times throughout a season that you do, you need to be on your game. And I guess the first time that they did, that wasn't the case, especially Denzel Burke. But pretty much any time after that, I remember like the Indiana game, we were curious about that too. And it all goes together with the way the defensive line played. I think we understand that. But that secondary and the corners in particular had to play well, had to like reset, I guess, after that first Oregon game. And it seems to me like they did. So I don't know what you'd call it other than an incredibly strong sort of response to that one particular game and then finish to the season.
Yeah. I mean, if we're looking at the review portion for the Ohio State corners, I mean, Denzel Burke is going to the NFL Combine this week. He's the only piece that Ohio State is going to have to replace their corner. We'll get into that and some of the surprise there with getting both Davison Igbinosun and Jermaine Matthews back for another year. But I'm pretty curious how the NFL talent evaluators, general managers, coaches, anybody else are going to view Denzel Burke, because he came back with, the goal to, he was really the most vocal about natty or bust, and he accomplished that part of it. But he also said before the Cotton Bowl in 2023 that part of his decision was wanting to come back and be the first cornerback taken in the NFL draft and prove that he was the best cornerback in America. And I think certainly those of us who watched every snap that he played last year, even for me, I'm thinking primarily about the Oregon game. I don't think he played at the level that he anticipated from snap 1 through the end of the season. And I think that would be fair. And primarily those missteps against the Ducks in Eugene the first time around are what we're all going to harp on. I wonder how much that one game will affect his draft stock as he goes through this process, where I bet he's going to test well. I think his confidence in the interviews, I bet he's going to do pretty well in those situations. And he's got a lot of good tape, as much football as he's played. So I wonder if some of that, the lowest moments, if those are overblown or if they will be harped on even more as he gets into this next phase ahead of the NFL draft.
Yeah, it's a good thing to bring up. I'm not sure. My guess is that teams will probably zero in on those two games against Oregon. The first one went wrong, and then what he was able to correct the second time around. I think NFL teams make sense. Like just want to watch you against the best possible competition, and that was certainly that for Denzel Burke. So he gave up 2 touchdowns in that game. Those are the only 2 touchdowns he gave up all year. So he didn't give up any prior to that. Didn't give up any after that. I'm not saying that he was perfect in every game after that. I remember like the Northwestern game, there were a couple snaps where he got beat over the top. I think he also made a play or 2 in that game too. But it wasn't like he totally shut down everybody beyond that point. But he for me is maybe like the most interesting guy for Ohio State going into the draft, because I feel like I have a pretty good idea of where most of the guys that are going to get drafted are going to end up. But I don't know that I feel super confident about Denzel. And you're talking about a draft class that's going to be, for probably 15 players if I had to guess. So like feeling pretty good about like a dozen of those is pretty solid for Ohio State. And I think most of those guys are going to be like at worst second round picks. I'm not totally sure on Denzel. I'm eager to see if he does test at the combine and what those numbers might look like. It's a speed position. I actually the 40 time tends to get overblown quite a bit at the combine, but I think it matters quite a bit and quite obviously for cornerbacks and receivers. So I would like to see what Denzel does there. But I think like the tape, I guess. And it's not like I was going back and grinding every single snap that Denzel Burke played, but just like watching it all on first blush, like I thought he had a fine season. He's not a corner who's gonna like go out there and get 9 interceptions, right? And the fact that maybe even he's not tested all that much is probably in some respects like a reflection of what teams think of him. He only had 10 targets total in the entire playoff run. So teams weren't like trying to attack him either. So which is to say, like, I don't think they viewed him as vulnerable. So like I think he's a solid player with a very bad day, but otherwise had an okay season. But yeah, it could very well work out that the NFL chooses to focus mostly on that very bad day, unfortunately.
Yeah, they can. I mean, that's sort of what they do, and you can understand why. I mean, I'm not telling them that they should ignore that. And I think that knowing Denzel, and you and I and Burm have spent a great deal of time around Denzel Burke and interviewing Denzel Burke, and playing Buck 9 at Fairway Columbus with Denzel Burke. Like he's not going to shy away from that. We call him the truth teller, and he may give different excuses, or he may not try to rationalize it any way other than it was a bad day. Like he has not talked about it a lot publicly since then, because the choice was it happened. So what else do you have to do but to try and make sure it doesn't happen again, which I think he did a really good job of that. And I'm going to miss talking to Denzel Burke, and I'm going to miss covering him, but I wonder, and this will sound crazy, like how much Ohio State's actually going to wind up missing Denzel Burke on the field next season, because they have 2 returning veterans now, because I think Jermaine Matthews has earned that. He's heading into year 3 and has played enough to be in that boat. And Davison Igbinosun is going to be a 3-year starter for Ohio State after he came back. I thought, and I said this on numerous shows in December and into January, thought if you can get 1 out of 2 to return, I think you may have to choose if you're Ohio State and you're managing the quote unquote salary cap. They got them both back. And I am very surprised, certainly pleasantly for Ohio State's perspective, that's a huge deal. They once again have the pieces to be the best group of cornerbacks in the country.
They do. And I suppose I wasn't, I figured that they'd only get one of those guys back. And if I were to guess who it would be, I would probably guess Jermaine Matthews, which would have just been, I think Davison Igbinosun probably would have went to the league, not necessarily transfer or anything like that. And I thought if it was just Jermaine Matthews, they'd be okay. Like I'd still be excited about what they have coming back, but like to have them both back and all of that really exciting youth at the position with the guys who were freshmen last year stepping up, and then obviously the incoming freshman class headlined by Devin Sanchez. Like it's I guess like a pretty inexperienced room behind the top 2 with Davison and Jermaine, but the talent is like just raw talent is probably about as good as it's been. And arguably, if you just want to talk about like ceilings of guys in that room, perhaps even a bit better than it was this past season. And maybe going back to like, I don't even know, like obviously the 2019 group had a couple of first rounders in there, but maybe you can even argue that if you're just talking about pure projection and what we expect some of these guys to be, maybe you could say this group at least has the opportunity to be maybe not as good top end, but deeper than that room was too. So, Tim Walton's done a really good job recruiting. I think we all know that, but you're starting to see some of the benefits of that now. So you have 2 really established guys with Davison and Jermaine. And I like the way that Davison played, aside from the penalties, obviously. Who likes those? But I think there's a lot to his game. If he can, if he were a guy who like every single year had double-digit penalties, I'd be scared about it. But he's not. He had way too many. 1 per game in a 16-game season. Is a lot, but the tools are great, and Jermaine Matthews is awesome, and I love the attitude that he plays with. I'm like, those 2 guys setting the tone for that room could be pretty fun to watch throughout the year. So Denzel was very good. Denzel's a national champion. And it's just a testament to what Ohio State is. I think that they built the room to be okay to kind of suffer that loss and move forward.
I spent a lot of time on the position reviews and previews when we were looking at the corners last year and just say, well, I kind of think Jermaine's going to elevate. I thought he might take Davis Enigbenosin's starting job. And the thing that I mentioned were the penalties. And like you look back to now 2 seasons ago, and that number was 6. And I was like, I don't know, am I making too big of a deal out of that? That number's not too out of the norm. Like, even though it's more than most corners would have, and more than anybody else in the Big Ten, it's like, I don't know, that seems like it's nitpicking a little bit too much. And then it wound up like being, almost triple that over the course of the season. And now they played more games. And so just looking at the raw numbers wouldn't be exactly fair, but 1 per game is wild. Just the fact that you could expect that was going to happen at some point for Ohio State. And I remember, Jim Knowles and Ryan Day being asked about, like, do you just have to live with that? And their answer is like, no, you shouldn't. But they were trying to work that out of his game and talking about putting, gloves on his hands so that he couldn't grab during practice. And there's just an element of the way he plays that you're probably not ever going to lose some of that grabbiness, the hands-on, the physicality that he plays with and challenging the receiver. Like, I think you may have to just accept that as part of his game because there's multiple years of evidence that that's the way he plays. And if the trade-off is you get red zone one-handed interceptions against Penn State on the road in exchange for 1 pass interference penalty every game, I don't know that that's the worst bargain in the world.
I saw in the one interview, well, not interview, but the podcast that Matt Patricia did with Julian Edelman, they were talking about, I guess there were times with the Patriots where they were like, I think they said, I don't think they said like tape their hands behind their back because that seems like it would make it really hard to run. But I think like tape their hands like clubs kind of, and make the corners play that way. So Davison could be in for an interesting spring, I think, with the new defensive coordinator. And we know that they did the boxing gloves things with him too, as you mentioned. So yeah, it's a tricky balance for him. And honestly, I think some of it too, it just depends on like what kind of officials you get sometimes. Not to explain away 16 penalties in one season, which made him the most penalized defensive player in college football. I just think it's going to come down. I think the number will come down. I think combination of maybe getting some better luck and continued coaching on it, and him understanding too, like he's come back for a money year at Ohio State, and the first thing that teams are going to be looking at for him this year is whether or not that penalty number comes down. So I actually can live with maybe more than the norm for a guy that plays as physically as Davison does, but certainly not 16. But I also expect that number to come down.
Yeah. I mean, I thought he was going to clean some of that up a year ago, and I was wrong. But again, I'm not saying it in a way that I view Davis Enigbenosin as a unproductive corner or damaging to the Ohio State defense, because part of the way that they play and the edge that he brings comes because he walks up to the edge. Sometimes he goes past it. We have spent a lot of weeks, talking with Bobby Carpenter about having some wild cards out there and guys that will maybe commit some penalties. Those, I don't think this is the kind that he means, pass interference or defensive holding, but it's part of the deal there with him. And I think as highly as we speak of the ceiling for both Davis Enigbenosin and Jermaine Matthews, like there could also be some penalties on the other side of the field for very different reasons. Like these guys have more confidence, more toughness, more swagger, and maybe more penalty flags coming their way than any other combination of corners in the country. And I'm like, I guess I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be entertaining at the very least. I think you don't want too many of them. Like I think that there's a benefit to like being able to, I think, to get into opponent's head in that way, as long as you're not costing your team points and stuff like that. So they'll have to be careful about it, but they'll definitely bring that element to the cornerback room, which I'm mostly excited to see how that plays out. And I think Tim Walton understands and knows how to like manage those sort of personalities as well, that will get like all of the possible benefit out of it without incurring much of the risk that can come with it too. At least that's my hope anyway. I'm looking through this as we're talking about it, just to because I think when people talk about Davison, it's like penalties, and that's like obviously that's all well and good, and fair and should be discussed. Corners that faced 60 targets this year, he was 15th in passer rating allowed, so it's like he had a good year. Mm-hmm. If you take away those penalties, like you can look at his PFF coverage grade and it's like yellow because of the penalties, but otherwise, like he was good in coverage this year. Made like one incredible play with that interception against Penn State. So I just like I don't know that I've sensed a bunch of like. Sometimes a guy says coming back like, well, I don't know that I want him back. I don't know that I've sensed a lot of that, but if there's like any of it, I guess I'd like to get in front of it because I do think he's a pretty darn good corner that has still a ton of upside if he can cut down those penalties.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying that Ohio State should only take 1 out of 2 back. I just didn't think that they would be able to get them both. And I thought it could have been cost prohibitive to do so. So, we don't know the exact dollar amounts on those, but it's possible that Davison Igbinosun, you said that's a sort of a money year coming up for him. He may have had more questions to answer heading to the NFL level this offseason than Denzel Burke. So he may have more to prove, which will be fascinating to watch. I feel like I'm about to give too short a shrift to the rising sophomores, and I don't want to, but everyone's going to be looking at Devin Sanchez in 3 weeks. So, I mean, Berm is saying, if you haven't seen Berm talk about Devin Sanchez before or his interview with him last year down in Texas, I mean, Berm calls him the Jeremiah Smith of cornerbacks. So he was right about Jeremiah Smith, obviously. So I don't want to criticize him, and Berm's not here to give these thoughts, but like, I did not know that such a thing would be possible.
Yeah, what a blessing for Ohio State to have 2 versions of Jeremiah Smith in back-to-back years on opposite sides of the ball. He's going to get a ton of attention and eyeballs, and deservedly so. Like I think like, and it was similar for Jeremiah. Like the talent is one thing, but there's just like a professional approach that kind of emanates from those guys that just, if you have the talent and sort of the mental acuity to handle the speed of college football at a young age, like that maturity is like the last thing that you need to be basically like an immediate star. And Devin Sanchez seems to have that. So like, I'll go in the spring ball, I guess, like trying to temper my expectations a little bit too, but like on the other side of my brain, I'm like, I think he'll be in a rotational corner as a true freshman. So if not, maybe even pushing for a starting job. By some point this year, I do think he's that talented, but I don't want to look past the second year guys either. Like Bryce West didn't play a whole lot, but he made a heck of a play. It was a Tennessee game that he made that pass breakup. Aaron Scott, has a ton of upside and like a physical frame that I think is similar to Davison Igbinosun. So like can all of Davison, Jermaine, and Aaron Scott and Bryce West and Devin Sanchez play regularly? Probably not. There's perhaps an opportunity. Berman and I talked about some of this when we did the safeties episode of like who from that group could maybe play inside, whether that's Davison or Aaron with those bigger frames. That could open a door potentially for some more reps to go around this cornerbacks room. We'll see exactly how that all plays out and how Tim Walton and Matt Patricia kind of want to deploy that talent. But that's what I mean when I talk about depth, because like for a moment, let's pretend that like Devin Sanchez, was a 2026 recruit. It wasn't going to be here till next year. And it was just the 2 guys that were going to come back, we assume are starters, and like Aaron Scott and Bryce West. Like I'd be pretty excited about that. So like I think there's a ton of talent there. There's a ton of potential with all of those guys. It has a chance, I guess, depending on how Ohio State wants to structure spring ball, to be super competitive through those 15 practices, without knowing what that's going to look like exactly in terms of logistics. So I think everyone's sort of ready for Devin Sanchez, but I'm pretty excited about Aaron Scott and Bryce West too.
Well, and we also know that another person that they have used in that role and in the dime group last year, Lorenzo Styles, is back as well. So like that's part of the depth. I don't think anyone looks at Lorenzo and is like, well, this will be the year that everything clicks defensively. Like, I'm not sure what the ceiling is. I don't see an all Big Ten caliber defensive back, at least not to this point. But he has now got an extra year of playing defense under his belt. He'll have more spring ball. He'll have, He's in the middle of winter workouts again. I don't know what that will mean for him, but it still fits into the same bucket that you're talking about with veteran depth. I mean, the way that Tim Walton, which we haven't even really, singled out the praise that he's done with this group. We talk about that a lot with Brian Hartline, and we've gone through other position groups like this person's done this and that, and like they've done a great job. The spot that Tim Walton inherited was pretty bleak. Yep. They were not even close to BIA, and now they could roll out 2 units that would be better than anybody else in the Big Ten, maybe. I mean, I don't know how it happened. He just snapped his fingers, and year one, people had some questions if he was going to be the right fit or the right guy. That group was just battered by injury and bad luck and didn't play great. But he plugged away, and you look at the recruiting success, you look at the on-field success, you look at the development that has happened for these guys. It is remarkable. Tim Walton has done a great job, and Ryan Day, I think, did a great job zeroing in on bringing in Tim Walton and has steadily given him more responsibility, even if it's not like primary defensive coordinator or anything like that. I think he's in a nice spot, and certainly the work has paid off.
Yeah, it was a pretty shrewd piece of hiring by Ryan Day in hindsight, because I didn't really know what to make of it when he hired Tim Walton, other than liking the fact that he was a Buckeye. But you look at the resume, and just like, and I guess it's the nature of the NFL that guys bounce around, so maybe I shouldn't have read too much into it. But he's been great. He's been better than great. Far exceeded whatever expectations I had, especially on the recruiting front, having not done it in so long. But he's got the total package, it seems like, recruiting and development. The players love playing for him. I think there's a great just sort of like energy in the cornerback room that was sorely missing for a couple of years. Just like, well, from the highest of highs to like the what did Urban call the running back, the Cadillac of the cornerbacks that Ohio State had for a while. And then it wasn't that, and it was all sort of puzzling as it was happening, but Tim Walton kind of flipped it on its head. And like Denzel Burke, I think it's a lot of credit for that too, for helping, try to sustain through the earlier, leaner years of that, and then helping set the tone for the last couple where it's been quite good. And now I think it's in pretty good hands, with starting with Tim Walton, but with the players that are there too. And like, I think, having these young first and second year guys, I think, like chomping at the bit to get on the field early will only kind of keep that culture that seems very good, pretty healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's been remarkable, and the BIA moniker has been well earned and well established yet again by the Buckeyes. We'll be watching closely in about, what do we got, 3 weeks to go until spring ball starts. That's weird. It's gonna require some adjustment there. I used to complain about them starting with the acclimation practices before spring break, and now it's like, that'd be cool if we got to watch football in about a week's time. But we'll still be talking plenty about the Buckeyes until then. If you missed 24 Ever on Friday, Carlos Locklin was on the show. We are working on another one to roll out this week. We'll be at Roosters later today, which is Monday, for the live show. So stick around for that as well. Of course, we'll have the podcast daily all week long, as we always do, talking about the Ohio State Buckeyes right here. But that was a breakdown of the corners, looking back and forward to the BIA group with Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you later.